Fitness, and today we are going to be starting our three-part series on creating tension in the bench press. So creating tension in the bench press is, in my opinion, one of the most difficult things to do when you're learning how to perform the exercise properly and optimally. Today's video is going to cover the setup of the bench press and how to set up to optimize tension in your body. Anyway, hope you enjoy the video. Let's get started. Before we get into the setup itself, I want to cover a few common mistakes that people make when pressing. Now, a lot of times people will see their favorite athlete or their favorite powerlifter perform a bench press a certain way and think that that is the exact same way that they are going to be pressing. That is not the case. Everyone is going to be a little bit different in their setup, the way they execute the movement, and the things that they need to do to be able to get strong on the bench press. So this video is more about educating you on how to optimize your technique rather than a single technique that works for everyone.
One of the first issues I see when people are newer to the bench press is they simply lay down and just start pressing the bar up and down. This isn't inherently bad, but this video is about optimizing technique. So we want to pick a technique that allows us to move the most amount of weight possible based on our body. Another common mistake that I see is people lowering the weight and completely letting the weight cave into their body and collapse their setup. This might work for some of the strongest benchers in the world, but will not be ideal for everyone. The third common mistake I see is when people lower the bar with control, but then allow it to collapse onto them as they get closer to their chest because they cannot maintain tension.
Before we get into covering the two setup techniques, now that we've covered some common mistakes, I want to cover the purpose of a proper bench press setup. The goal of a proper bench press setup is to prevent excessive movement in your body when pressing. It's not that movement in the body is bad, but if we are pressing and the body is moving around, it makes it a little harder to maintain similar form from rep to rep, as well as maximize our power through tension in our body. So if there's a lot of movement going on in the body, it makes it a lot harder to express how much strength the individual has. So what we want to try and do with these setup techniques is remove any excessive movement in the bench press while we're performing.
The goal of a proper setup is going to be to create as much tension throughout the body and prevent our body from moving around while we are pressing. Think about doing a heavy squat or deadlift. Would you want your torso or spine to be moving in the middle of the exercise? No. It's the same thing with a bench press. We want to create enough tension in our body, that way when we bring the bar down to our chest, our body does not move around. This is the first of two setups that I will show you to solve this problem. The first thing you want to do is place your hands on the uprights and your feet on the bench. You then want to lift your hips off of the bench, like performing a hip thrust, and use the uprights to push your scapula together. Once this is done, we want to place one hand on the bench bar individually at a time. Once our hands are on the bar, we want to push our shoulders into the bench and slowly step off the bench one at a time, creating tension. It's important to remember while creating our setup that we want to maintain as much tension as possible throughout the setup. If you go throughout this entire setup process but are not squeezing your shoulder blades together or gripping the bar tightly or pushing your feet into the floor, you will lose the tension that you create. So try to create this setup and perform it very intentionally, and think about creating as much tension as possible throughout your entire body. The second of these two setups is a bit more simple. What we want to do is slide up on the bench and place our feet where they are going to start the press. Then we want to create an arch through our back and drive our feet and shoulders into the floor. In my opinion, this is the easier of the two setups to learn. So especially if you are a beginner and not sure about how to set up, this will be the easier of the two to start with. The reason why a proper setup is important is, especially if our goal is to maximize the amount of weight we can move on a bench press, we want to limit the distance that we have to move from our chest to the top of the movement. When a proper setup is created, it ensures that our chest will stay high as we press the weight. If the chest drops during the movement, it requires us to move the weight further and makes the exercise harder. If you notice here in this video, as my chest collapses, the bar moves lower and lower closer to the bench. Not only does this require me to move the bar further, but it actually pulls my elbows out of the ideal pressing position. What many people misunderstand about the bench press is that it is not a straight up and down movement. The barbell actually moves slightly diagonal during the movement. So what we want to try and do is keep our elbows tucked in so that they are ready to press the bar back towards the rack. If the body collapses like so, it pulls our elbows out of position and makes it harder to return the bar to the top of the movement. If the setup is done correctly, it will allow us to perform the movement without a ton of caving in of the chest. The torso should stay at relatively the same height during the entire exercise.
Now, I'm sure a lot of you watching this video are thinking, my bench press looks nothing like that. I fall out of position all the time. Remember that this process is not about being perfect. What we are trying to do is we are trying to create better movement patterns over time, which will allow you to lift more. So if you are noticing that your body is falling out of position, try working on your technique and your setup little by little, and over time as you practice it, it will improve. But don't try to revamp your entire bench press overnight. It's going to take time, and it's going to take lots of practice. So, before we end, let's do a quick recap of what we learned. The first thing that we learned today was common mistakes made in the bench press and why we want to try and avoid them. The second thing that we covered was optimal setup technique to eliminate these mistakes and allow us to perform proper, optimal presses. Now, there's going to be 3 parts in this video series. Today, we obviously covered the setup and common mistakes. The next video is going to be covering how to create tension during the press itself and eliminate movement and eliminate any issues that may come up. And the third video is going to be a series of exercises that you can use based on where your sticking point is in the bench press, especially if you struggle with maintaining tension. So anyway, hope you enjoyed the video. Be sure to tune in for those next 2 videos that we'll be dropping within the next couple weeks. And as always, stay strong.